morning to you all. Good afternoon to our participants, depending on where you're joining us from. We're excited to get the opportunity to have all of you join us as we kickstart this year's Global Economic Ideas Festival, which is brought to you by the ICC, the Institute of Certified Chartered Accountants. So to begin, we have privileged to have the chairperson for GEIF 2023, no other person than Dr. Fran Luthier, who has joined us to give us some opening remarks, and then I'll also come in before we kickstart the session. So, Dr. Franny, please, we want to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning to everyone. We are very, very happy that you are able to join us this year for another important discussion on issues that are of relevance to the economies of our countries, to our own professional understanding of what's going on in the world, and for the information of those who have to make decisions using economic information. This program comes from an idea that we do need to have the best minds to think about the current issues and to embed them within economic theory, financial theory, and bring those together in a way that is relevant for people in practice. And because economics was not a profession where you get satisfied, with a lot of people saying, well, anybody can be an economist. After all, you understand demand and supply, prices go up, prices come down. So what's the point of certifying economists? But we thought that actually that's one of the most important things we could do, so that the economists that are out there giving advice to governments, to the private sector, to civil society are doing that with the right grounding, using the best available knowledge, and being able to test their hypothesis and be tested by experience, so that what we end up doing going forward is not so uncertain and not so ad hoc. And then finally, and this comes really from when I was doing my research as a grad student, one of the things I was very curious about is the epsilon, the error term. And it turns out that in any decision process, if you start off with a perfectly determinate and predictable system, but then you put decisions onto it that are very ad hoc and not very easy to predict, the system becomes unpredictable over time. And I believe what we've been doing over all these years, particularly in Africa, with advice coming from different quarters which haven't been testing these hypotheses well enough, that has created an environment where we have very uncertain systems to deal with. So I'm very happy to welcome you to this year's forum. It's a forum for ideas. It's a festival. We call it a festival because we are celebrating ideas, and we are pushing for excellence and pushing for bringing together the best that we can gather from around the world in order to all of us, first of all, improve our own understanding, share our own knowledge and experience, and support those who are in key decision-making positions to actually benefit from the wisdom of our reflections and our celebration of ideas. So with that, I pass on to Paul, who will give you a detail then about how these days are going to proceed, why we are functioning the way we are, and any other sharing that he would like to do. So thank you very much and welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Franny. We appreciate you so much for the good job that you've done. Of course, you've chaired our first of GEIF for the second year running, being the chair for the first edition last year, and then also chairing for this year. We are so grateful for your time and the insight and the support for the GEIF. You touched briefly about what we are and what we intend to do, especially from the ICC point, that we are an institution that is certified economist. So we are providing what we call the Chartered Economist certification, where we are allowing individuals, economists all over the world from at various levels in their career, whether you're a student, you start your career, or you are even a seasoned economist, that you like to belong to a global association, global society like what we have, then of course we'll give you the opportunity to be a part of it. So the ICC is providing a globally certified chartered economic designation to all economists and aspiring economists because we are bringing together all these individual economists from all over the world so that we can champion a common goal of knowledge sharing, networking, and of course, meeting the highest standards as economists. And so that is one of the core things that we do. And for ICCE, we have various gateways, no matter which level you are in your career. So whether you're a student, recent graduate, or been working for the last 5, 10 years, you've been working as a seasoned economist for about 20, 30 years, you still can be a part of the ICC. And in the course of the conversation, of course, I'll put my email address there. I'll also put the website of ICC there again. So those who have joined us and are interested in the ICC, you can take the opportunity to be a part of the ICC where you get to join a global network of economists. Now to the GEIF, of course, we're running this for the next 2 days, today being the day 1 and of course day 2. So today we have about 4 sessions that we are running. The first session happening right after my remarks, and the second session will come later. We'll be scheduled emails, so we should be getting your emails from us every hour leading to the next session, and we have specified links join those various sessions as well. So you'll be getting these updates, and we hope that all of us will be able to contribute to this year's GEIF and make it a success. At the end of the session, I'll come back again to give our remarks in terms of what we're going to do in the next session. So thank you very much. At this point, I'll be handing over to our moderator, Jennifer Blanke, who also is the co-chair for GEIF 2023. She's been instrumental in all the structures that we have here today. So Jennifer, please, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Paul. And Paul, can you do me a favor? I just tried to call again in on my PC. Can you just undo see if my video works now on that one? Because it'll just be a little bit easier. I don't know if you see, no, it's still not working. Okay, so I'm just going to do it on my iPad. Okay, so anyway, wonderful to be here with everybody, and very excited to have this opportunity to talk about an issue that I think is so important. What we're going to talk about now in this session, the very first session, is the promise and peril of the digital economy and how frontier technology is shaping the global economy. I can think of no better topic to kick off this year's Global Economic Ideas Festival, particularly given what Franny and Paul just said about the goals of the festival. As we have seen, rapid advances in frontier technologies, from artificial technology to blockchain, are really reshaping industries and changing the way economies function. And these technological innovations will have profound impact on the way that we work, trade, and interact in the digital age. You almost can't open a newspaper or look at the news or look at anything that's going on right now without seeing the impact, whether it's ChatGPT or many other things. So today we have an excellent panel of experts to help us navigate the opportunities and challenge of the digital economy, which holds both the potential for enhanced productivity and economic growth, which we want, but also raises a lot of concerns over privacy, security, and economic inequality. So to help us kind of understand and navigate these challenges and opportunities, I'm delighted to introduce our excellent panel. We have Solomon Quaynor, who is Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization at the African Development Bank. Welcome, Solomon. We have Dare Okuju, who's founder and CEO of MFS Africa, that does a lot in the fintech space, digital space. Anya Kaspersen, who's the Director for Global Markets Development, IEEE. And last but not least, Alex Wong, Senior Advisor, Strategic Engagement and Initiatives in the Executive Office of the International Telecommunication Union. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask all of the panelists a set of questions. And then we'll have basically 2 rounds of discussion. And then what I want to do is open the floor to all of you in the virtual room. So please do prepare any questions or comments that you have. So Solomon, let me start with you. When you think about development priorities, and from your perch at the African Development Bank and also previous roles, what aspects of digitalization hold the greatest promise for accelerating development? And what are the biggest dangers? Solomon.
Okay, no, thank you very, very much, Jennifer. So it's great to be invited to this festival. I'm not an economist, I'm a banker, but I work with a lot of development economists at the African Development Bank. I mean, to respond to your question, let me first of all set the stage of what we mean by development priorities. Yeah. So the key development priorities that we're all aspiring to globally are the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. We have simplified it, at the African Development Bank, and we've come up really with 5 catchy development strategic priorities that would also make things a little more, simplified, and ultimately, if delivered, would achieve, over 90% of the SDGs, and in addition, would achieve really, Agenda 2063, which is the strategy of the African Union. And those high fives are, very simple: light up, empower Africa, feed Africa, industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life for all Africans. So if you take a look at these strategic priorities, very clearly, digitization has an impact in all of them. So similar to the conversation that we're having in the development world around climate change and climate resilience, which is a cross-cutting priority. It's not just in the energy space. It impacts, agriculture. It impacts industrialization. Digitization also has that impact. Even when we were taking a look at our industrialization strategy, which goes really from agro-processing to pharmaceutical manufacturing, we realized that digitization, or what we are capturing as the 4th industrial revolution, actually impacts all of this. So if we accept then that digitization, and we don't have a digitized Africa because it's a cross-cutting approach, which aspects are important to have? I think it's almost all of them, or all aspects of digitization, and I'll touch on a few, are important to have and to simultaneously have that. So it's what we will describe as an ecosystem approach. I mean, we need to have the infrastructure in place in the context of Africa, because it's not as readily available as it is in the Western world. And we need to have a combination of broadband, 4G, 5G, satellite, fiber, because we want to make sure that the entire population are not only financially included but economically included. Data is really the underpinning of a lot of applications and services that are built on data. So we need to have data centers, the cloud architecture, AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, big data analytics. Then the services, that actually come on top of that. And I think, Dari would talk more about that, whether it's fintech, whether it's ag tech, whether it's health tech, but the application of the various emerging technologies to deliver, critical services, with greater productivity, greater efficiency, and the ability to generate growth is important. However, in all of these areas, you need regulation. But you need regulation that allows for innovation and does not constrain innovation, but also continues to protect consumers. Okay. Skill. We need to develop, the right skills, across Africa. So this is one of the reasons, where we have what we call the Coding for Employment, where we want to really train over 230,000 African coders. And for those who don't know, Jennifer used to actually manage the group that is actually focusing on this. We need the right partnerships. And so, for example, at UNGA this year, we signed a partnership with Google. What is it going to focus on? It's really what I've just talked about. It's the emerging technologies and applications in fintech, health tech, and ag tech. It's about infrastructure connectivity. It's about talent and workforce development. And it's also about regulations, because we have the ability to actually advocate with the appropriate government parties in that sense. And then finally, financing. Financing is needed. It's part of the digitization equation. I mean, we have good news in the context of Africa in 2022. $6.5 billion was actually raised, to finance various tech-enabled companies, especially fintechs. Okay, we have at least 10 unicorns, in place. So there's good news about financing. However, we need to make sure that the pipeline, that creates the tech and tech-enabled companies, that creates the innovation, that continues to support the innovation actually works. And this is where we have established the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank, which interestingly is something that Jennifer and I used to work on when I first joined the African Development Bank, because Jennifer was there. And we've started to roll that out, and I can always talk more about it. But in all of this, there are some dangers, right? With great innovation, there are some dangers. Data privacy, cybersecurity, and some people even questioning whether AI and other forms of automation are not going to do people out of work. Yes, those points are important points, but we should not really constrain innovation as a result. But hopefully, we have regulation actually so proactive that it comes after the innovation and protects consumers. So those are some of my initial thoughts, Jennifer. Once again, thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thanks so much, Solomon. And, so I think we all look to the digital space as being a silver bullet in a sense, not really a silver bullet, but at least an accelerator. But we need more money. We need more skills for it. There's no easy way. And indeed, I think over the past year or so, we've become even more aware of some of the dangers. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that now from some of our other panelists. Now, Dari, I'd love to hear from you now. You have many years of experience working in the digital space. From the perspective of a business person, an entrepreneur who is working in the space, what do you see as some of the greatest areas of promise? And also, what do you see as some of the, sort of challenges, maybe building on some of what Solomon said and really from the on the ground perspective? Dari.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for having me. I would say probably in terms of opportunity, I will mention three. The very first, I think the digitalization in general has considerably lowered the bar to start businesses across the continent. I think MFS Africa itself is a perfect example of that. We operate in more than 40 countries across the continent. Many of those places, we don't have teams on the ground. We visit every now and then. This would not have been possible 30 years ago, without the advancement of the internet and all the infrastructure that have been laid. And I think this is also true for the ability for new people to start businesses and also expand businesses across places on the continent. The second one I will say is the incredible opportunity in reorganizing and bring efficiency to what is mostly offline today in Africa. And Solomon started mentioning that sectors like agri, education, health, mobility, and I know there are thousands of startups or scale-up companies across the continent that are spending incredible amount of energy and time and talent on optimizing things that we know that were previously offline. And I think,
can I quick 45 minutes?
Oh,
okay.
Anya, can you go on mute just until you come in, just because we're hearing you. Thank you. Dari, go on, please.
Yeah, so I think that the reorganization, ability to reorganize the offline and bring efficiency to it is also something that holds great promises. And then the last one I would say is probably around payment, which is closer to what I do every day. The digitalization of payment in particular have actually solved a couple of things, and some of them may not be that obvious. The first one is increase a lot of the resilience of our economies across. I'm sure you all watched in Nigeria earlier this year when the change of the notes, the demonetization, as it was called, kicked in. It was because Nigeria had strong infrastructure for payment that we were absolutely able to absorb that shock. Or 10 years ago, again, that would not have been possible. It would have ended up much, much worse than what we see. And instead, people just moved to digital ways and the infrastructure was there. The other place where real-time payment in particular is also helping us a lot is to compensate for the low trust that we have in our economies. I mean, when you go to market at different places in Africa, actually, the trust factor is quite low in transactions, and that inflate cost of transaction. But real-time payment allow us to mitigate part of that because money moves instantly. So all in all, I would say, ability considerably lowering the bar of what you need to start a business and expand a business on the continent, ability to reorganize what is offline and make it more efficient around health, education, agriculture, and mobility, and the resilience that is building into the system in general are the things that I'm more excited about when it comes to digitalization.
What's your biggest challenge?
I think consumer protection will probably cut top of my list. I think as we're going into this at various levels, there's various levels also of understanding, and I think we have a collective responsibility to the most vulnerable users, and I don't think we're always measuring up well to that. So that would probably be top of my list. I think talent will continue to be a problem. I think, especially as we scale companies across the continent, your ability to recruit fast, to find people who can do it, who have done it, continue to be a challenge. And to some extent, and that's where maybe, Solomon, we can disagree a bit. I think we need regulation, but we don't need regulation everywhere and all the time. And I think we probably go too quickly to that, and it does stifle some of the innovation, some of the progress that we could make. But I also mindful that you also have to have responsible founders to allow to play, and it's not always the case. So we have to find the right balance there between when do you kick in? Do we have to start thinking right away about the regulation while we haven't actually seen what could be? It is a question, and I think at the moment we're probably erring too quickly on putting some rules.
Right. So, I think this is all a question of, so across all the issues, some of those things you and Solomon agree on, talent, et cetera. I assume you actually probably pretty much agree. It's a question of degree. But then the question arises as to the role of government versus the role of business in terms of providing a lot of these things, whether it's self-regulation, whether it's the training or it's the actual educational system. So I hope we have more time to kind of dig into that. Thanks a lot, Dari. Alex, I think that's a good kind of segue into your perspective from the ITU, which is taking an intergovernmental approach to a lot of what is happening in this space. How are you guys, sort of approaching the way to accelerate, the benefits of digitization around the world, so that we're getting more of the good and maybe less of the challenging parts? Alex.
Yeah. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. Good to see you again and other colleagues. So for those of you on the call, first I'll just introduce ITU for those of you that don't know who we are. International Telecommunication Union. We're a UN agency. We're the UN agency specialized on digital technologies. And our mandate is actually twofold: universal, meaningful connectivity. 2.6 billion people still don't have access to the internet, and sustainable digital transformation. So pretty well everything related to digital, but really with a focus on the sort of foundational elements. So my backdrop that I have on the screen is taking us maybe back a step on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And in September, a month ago at the UN headquarters, we hosted together with UNDP, and you can see the logo in the corner, what we call the SDG Digital Day. It was part of the broader UN agenda that took place on September 17th. And it was a day focused to really showcasing the role of digital and how it can accelerate progress on the SDGs. I think probably many of you on this call are familiar with the fact that we are drastically behind on the SDGs. So we started with that. We then published on the occasion of the our SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. But that's where we actually then took a step back and we first did an assessment of the SDG indicators. How many of those could have an impact by digital? And our analysis concluded that out of the 169 indicators that are used to measure progress on the SDGs, 119 of them, or roughly 70%, have either a direct or tangential impact of digital. So message number one, digital has a potentially huge role to play on digital. But as always, it has to be done carefully and cautiously. The acceleration agenda really then focused a lot on use cases because we wanted to actually show examples of use cases. And if I now sort of segue a bit into this whole emerging technology discussion, which is where this panel is around, The use cases did include several that showcase the role of things like AI to accelerate progress. For example, the Rainforest Alliance, that's just one example, tied to SDG 9, was how this organization used the combination of sound, measurements, data, big data, satellite imagery to sort of assess where illegal logging was happening. So you have all these kinds of examples. Before I get into the final piece about the emerging tech, I should say one more thing, because we do have a bunch of economists on the call. In our acceleration agenda, we actually tried to do an empirical analysis to connect progress on a country's digital maturity with SDG progress. So you can go through the appendix of the report to look at what we tried to do, but we basically used the data set of the SDG index. That's sort of like a macro index that has been developed to try to measure overall progress in digital. And we then used on the other axis a combination of the telecommunications infrastructure index and the data-only mobile broadband basket. So that was an attempt to measure digital maturity of a country. So we tried to plot the two to show progress. And there was, of course, not surprisingly, a correlation that the more mature a country is, the more faster they're making progress on SDGs. But then we got into this whole issue of causality and all sorts of stuff. So I would throw a challenge out to this group that if anyone wants to work with us on a very detailed empirical analysis on the linkage between digital tech and SDGs, please contact me. We would love to crack that nut. Okay.
You'll get excited talking about different.
There's been a lot of attempts. We've talked to a lot of people, and there's been a lot of attempts. Of course, the challenge is incompleteness of data. And of course, the causality is a big issue. Okay, anyway, that being aside, let me just turn finally to the emerging tech. So we did look at the role of emerging tech on SDG progress using digital. So in particular, we looked at artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, decentralized ledger technologies, 5G networks, and of course now we're even talking about 6G networks. And of course, as always with these emerging tech, there's tremendous opportunity, but tremendous risk. We identified 4 areas of risk that maybe tie into also what Dari said. First is, of course, we all know that the whole data inclusion and representation issue is a challenge. And so you can't make conclusions and analyses on AI if your data sets are incomplete. The second was related to transparency and accountability. A lot of the code that's being used for these algorithms is not open source. No one knows what code is being used. And so there's a bit of a call to maybe try to increase transparency so people can actually study or understand the algorithms that are being used. On the issue of regulation, and I think most of you know that today is the UK is hosting the AI Safety Summit. Our Secretary General is there right now, so who knows what they're cooking up. But on terms of the regulation, Dara well noted about not over-regulating or going too fast, but of course right now the challenge is that it's very fragmented. So I'm sure you as an entrepreneur, you know, the rules that you have to follow in one country in Africa versus another country are very challenging. So some sort of lack of decrease in fragmentation would be helpful. And then finally, cybersecurity. So let's not forget that, you know, until we address these core cybersecurity issues, which are still fairly prevalent, that, you know, then the whole premise of technology, you know, has to be built on a more secure platform. So I'll stop there, Jennifer, with that quick overview. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Alex. And I think your last point was really important about predictability for business. And, you know, and these things are popping up everywhere, right? The US has just, you know, come out with legislation that they're putting in place. So, so yeah, for you guys at the ITU to sort of take that into account, I suppose, you know, to take pity on the people who are trying to do work. And I think, again, perfect segue to Anya, who every time I want to get, you know, and I think, Anya, first I'd love just to hear from you about, you know, the whole inequality issue, but after that, maybe some security issues. Whenever I want to be really scared about what's going on in the world, I speak with Anya, who comes from a geopol and security background. And so I think really adds a very interesting perspective here. Anya, you and I have, you know, sort of collaborated on this issue of AI and how all the rules of the game are starting to potentially drive huge inequalities going forward. So how can, you know, if you think about it, how can AI foster, in particular, if we deep dive into this one technology that everybody's thinking about so much, equality and fairness, and I guess development eventually, which is, you know, what we care about a lot rather than inequality. Anya.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm not sure about the host. I can't start my video. So if there's anyone on the host side.
Yeah.
It says that the host has, yeah.
There you are. Hi, Anya.
There I am. It's always better this way. You know, we can do it virtually, but we can still see each other. You know, there's even a backside to all of us, right? Which we all forgot during the pandemic. So so thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here. And you know, as Jennifer was alluding to, you know, both Jennifer and Alex and I have done work together in the past, and you know, one of the big realizations, which I think is relevant, you know, is when Jennifer and I will go to places and we wouldn't see each other for days, because we realized that economists and those working on security and technology and politics were not really engaging. And this is the very intersection of society, the very kind of nexus that needs to be managed differently if we're going to get the right type of regulatory approaches, the right type of responses, etc., because it has this sort of deep impact. But let me just kind of, you know, go a few steps back. So if I can do it more, you know, sort of like give you a little bit of narrative of what I'm thinking. So as been said a few times, that we're definitely sort of in a period where AI signifies, you know, confluence of technologies, pushing the conventional limits of disciplines and governance. I think it's important, you know, it's pushing us, it's pushing new ways of thinking. So that's a positive thing, but it also challenges us in unprecedented ways. And as we navigate this evolution, our understanding and reaction, our way of responding to it must be agile. So in many respects, AI acts as a nexus. It helps us merge disciplines and transform systems that once existed separately. You know, why I mentioned that example with Jennifer and myself. But the integration brings these challenges, and what's more important, it also carries the potential to erode social cohesion. And we've seen this tendency being over many years. And this is, of course, important whether you work on security or you work on economic processes, or you work on connectivity and telecommunication like Alex, and innovation like others do on this panel. And it's prompting us to reassess governance, the role of standards, the way the regulatory, legislative branches operate, imperative of ethics. You know, how we define and relate to ethics is not like some, you know, thing that exists beyond us, but something that we use as tools in our everyday life. And the way that our regulatory legislative branches, you know, operate, you know, the full understanding of it. There's an ethical imperative in that as well. You know, how do we understand how they operate? And of course, the societal roles of these systems. You know, they're often described as social technical systems or techno-social systems, depending, you know, kind of where you're coming at it from. And it's important to understand that these, this is what they are. You know, we're talking less about technology and more about society, more about humans. That and what we embed into the systems. And I want to emphasize a very essential aspect that I feel sometimes is lost when we have this type of discussions. You know, discussing AI invariably centers around human essence, processes, and choices. And too often we are in these discussions where we are inundated with tech deterministic narratives, which in my view can be, you know, at best misleading and at worst detrimental for what we're trying to accomplish. And you know, in your talking notes, which you shared with me, you said, like, what keeps you up at night, which is a common question to sort of like really kind of come out with a big statement. And I often say, and, you know, my answer has varied, you know, throughout the years and throughout the months, because things are moving quite fast, especially in geopolitical terms. I was saying earlier, you know, take one look at the news, and I think anyone who claimed to be an expert on geopolitics would have to sort of check in on their own hubris. And that's exactly what I'm worried about with technology. I'm worried about a human hubris. I'm worried about when hubris gets ingrained into highly adaptive and intricate systems, the consequences become even more profound. And if you ask me about strictly the security aspect, you know, we're kind of dealing with a bit of a dual face type of situation. You know, someone was speaking the other day about, like, are we looking at a Janus, you know, the dual face Roman deity? You know, one facet showcases improved defense mechanisms, skillful anticipating threats. You know, Alex made a point about cyber, rectifying vulnerabilities. That's a big promise. Same thing with seeing commercial enterprises, optimization, but optimization at what cost and towards what? But the opposite, if mismanaged, if mishandled, it exposes dangers that transforms alarmingly. And so I'm also pondering, I spend a lot of my time, in all of my wearing different hats, and I'm speaking here strictly in my personal capacity, pondering on these brisk progressions of AI, which I have to say, worryingly, although we have a completely different discussion around ethics, there's much more happening on code and conducts and initiatives. Some of the discussions seem more and more distant from kind of deep ethical and societal reflections. So I would say one thing more, because, this is an economic, many of those listening in are economists. And a lot of the discourse today is dense with evasion and sensationalism. It spins a tale that often obstructs, I would say, in-depth deliberation. And despite the intrinsic flaws that these systems represents, they wield the potential to alter our interpersonal dynamics, how we perceive human nature, our grasp of safety, security, foundational principles. And I think there was a recent article in Scientific American with an interview with Stiglitz. He's known to probably everyone listening to this. And he actually speaks about the hazards of what he called unfettered innovation, which actually reminded me a little bit when I was reading the interview. There was a professor in the 60s called Weizenbaum. He actually devised the first ever chatbot experiment. So like the predecessor way back, what we're now talking about, ChatGPT, and these like sensor type systems that we're relating to and discussing and viewing as sort of transformative. And, his caution was around magical thinking. How we relate to these machines, we very quickly anthropomorphize. And as we intensify and become more reliant on these technologies, we also become more distorted in our engagement with them, which could then destabilize societal harmony, destabilize how we think of security. It challenges also, to Alex's point earlier, there are close to 3 billion people that are not online, but how do we make sure that that access is safe, that is well thought through, that we apply good principles? It doesn't just become an issue of optimizing numbers of online access, but making sure it's safe online access. Because often these 3 billion people are also in areas where we have to recognize that we operate in very different regions of the world with different legislative principles in place. And even in the best of countries, we're seeing that, these technologies are struggling in terms of, data privacy, how we manage data, this notion that these systems are fundamentally about power distributions more than they are about the technology itself. So it's highly complex. And I know I sort of probably went past my time, but I will say one last point, and that's these technologies are transitioning not merely into instruments, but into architectures that readjust power structures. And this notion that this, power and technology goes hand in hand. And I think AI is a representation how that is more true than ever. There's also a rising inclination to attribute human traits to the systems, which is often for diversion and recognition. So there's a commercial angle to the anthropomorphizing that is happening. I think it's important to understand these systems doesn't reason. That's part of the narratives that are being created. They analyze copious amounts of data governed by sophisticated mathematical models. And, there are many perspectives on this, in terms of where you stand on the math. Is the world created of math? Are we all just mathematical creatures? Is every action, every behavior? Jennifer knows this as an economist. There's a lot of math in economy in terms of predicting human behavior and making economic decisions. But I think it's important to understand that, to be able to be empowered to engage with these systems responsibly and knowingly, we have to push back on some of these narratives and understand that these systems it's less about the technology and more about who holds the power, who gets to decide who holds the power, who builds them, and what is the accountability to those building them, more than just focusing on the actual use of technologies themselves. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Anya. I think a lot of this is colored in our minds by a lot of these dystopian movies we've seen, whether it's, Terminator or WALL-E or whatever. So I'll come back to you after, though. I would like to hear from you a little bit more on the inequality aspects and the way that these things are sort of being built. So, be ready for that, because I'll come back to you a little bit on that.
And I think, by the way, WALL-E is probably one of the best movies you can possibly see to get what I just said.
Yes. I know. you were painting the picture, and I was sort of imagining that. So anyway, so everybody, and by the way, all young economists who might be on the listening in, I think this might be an area for future research if you're looking for a master's or a PhD topic. But anyway, so thank you, Anya. Solomon, I want to come back to you on something that you mentioned in your opening comments about finance, because obviously that's a big issue in order to do any of this in the positive way, not the WALL-E future, but the more positive sort of, future that we're imagining. So what have you seen in your work in development finance that has really worked and can scale? Solomon.
No, thank you very much, Jennifer. Before I answer the question, I just want Dare to know that I think we're violently agreeing in terms of the role of regulation. Regulation has a continuum, right? If you're in the pharmaceutical industry, you have regulation by the FDA, where you have to do years of research, and only certain sized companies with huge R&D budgets are able to actually innovate. But in the case of, tech and tech-enabled, the velocity of innovation that's happening suggests that, we should take a different approach to regulation. We should have the sandbox as an example. Recently I had the opportunity to sit down between the Minister of Finance of Kenya, who used to be the central bank governor, at a time when Equity Bank, people only hear about M-Pesa, but Equity Bank was the financial institution that used digital to reach the unbanked. They were the first ones to actually prove that model. And as I sat down between the two of them, I began to really understand the approach that the Minister of Finance, who was the central bank governor at that time, took. What he did was he said, okay, let me allow innovation because we're talking about a group that's unbanked, right? So he allowed the innovation and always, look to actually have regulation follow the innovation to ensure that, there's protection. Now, in the case of tech and tech-enabled, if we're going to allow and support that velocity of innovation, then we have to also accept that there will be significant failures. And in that regard, we've got to protect consumers. We should not look for perfect innovation where everything will be successful, because that's not really innovation. So I think we violently agree. So Jennifer, I just wanted to clarify that. Now, in terms of, financing, first of all, I don't think there's a significant financing gap per se, but there is a significant gap in terms of really bankable projects. And also there's a significant gap in the continuum of financing for tech and tech-enabled companies. And let me expand a little bit on that. When it comes, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen about $6.5 billion in 2022 come to support, tech and tech-enabled companies in Africa, especially, fintechs, right? But where we have not seen a lot of investment, is really at that early stage. In other words, supporting youth entrepreneurs with great ideas. We've tried to address it through the creation of technology parks, innovation hubs, of which we have about 640 active ones across Africa. So that's good. But, even if a business is successful, in an innovation hub, how does it get the right financing and the handholding to go to the next step? And in the context of Africa, we lack really an angel investment culture. So for us, this is why we've and Jennifer, when I first joined the AFDB, this was your baby, and we've taken it to the next step. We've created what we call the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank. And the idea is to really address the gap at that angel investment point. So that's really pre-seed, okay? So Dare, the idea, I don't know if you heard about the iDice program, that we supported in Nigeria. We've actually provided $620 million, really as a group of, multilateral development banks, of which AFDB put 170 million. And the idea is to really support investments in the digital and creative enterprises. And in this, we use a lot of shared services platforms. And that is to address that pipeline of innovation before the more experience, venture capital from the US and other places would really come more at the seed and post-seed level. So Jennifer, the innovation we've come up with, the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank, looks to address, the lack of early startup capital. In addition, for a lot of these tech and tech-enabled companies, when they mature, they don't really have a lot of physical assets. So the idea is to provide credit guarantees that can support them to actually go and raise debt. And for the venture capital and private equity investors, this is important because they need to have leverage returns on their investment. But it's not only about money, it's also about non-financial services. So we actually package this as well. And once again, Dari, going to my earlier point, we have to really have a risk appetite for failure. The early stage equity fund, makes good assumptions on really what the failure rates will be. Because otherwise, and what we're saying is we will support, we would support this early pipeline. Maybe one or two would become unicorns. Some would become very good annuity businesses, but not necessarily high growth. But it's good to actually create that continuum. And so this is the innovation that we've started rolling out. We're looking at doing it in small countries like Liberia. We're looking at doing it in Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, etc. And ultimately, we will roll this out in the key markets where we see, the great opportunities for tech and tech-enabled creative industries. Because for us, that innovation really happens at the youth level. Even though Dari has a little bit of whites, I think Dari will fit into youth as well. But anyway, look, that's just an example. And once again, it's a continuum of financing. We need to address that early stage, which, the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Bank or the GEIF will do. But we already have, a good interest globally and also regionally at the venture capital level for tech and tech-enabled. Private equity is also there. And then at a later stage, debt financing will come in, but this is where we're also looking to address that with credit guarantees because a lot of, the companies like MFS are not really asset heavy, but, they have, a lot of potential. So that's the example I'll give.
Great. Thanks a lot, Solomon. And I think this all comes down to sort of risk capital, right? But then those bankable projects, which is the eternal question, how do you marry these to each other? And it's great to hear, what the bank and others are doing together, because I would agree with you. The young, inspired entrepreneurs in Africa are so impressive, and they just need a helping hand. There's nothing more frustrating than training them up to figure out how to start a company, and then there's no financing there for them. Yeah. So, and for women, by the way, too, let's not forget all the great work that the African Development Bank has been doing on tilting the banking sector in favor of also lending to women entrepreneurs. So, Dari, let me come back to you. And you can build on that as well if you want. You talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you've been facing before. What would you say is sort of, front of mind right now for you in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer and Solomon. I need to come and collect some of that money you're talking about. So we'll sidebar on that. We can certainly use some of that. And your point you mentioned are all true in terms of where the gaps are in the chain and what, who need to step in at some point. And I will, one of the things is that we still need more Africans to invest in African ventures. One thing is to rely on, European, US capital, but capital needs context. And someone in San Francisco or in Shanghai or in Tokyo will not get the context of what you're trying to do in Monrovia or Conakry or Lusaka. So you need people in those countries and people closer to take some of these first risks. And I'm glad to hear what the bank is doing, and I think we need to amplify that, and there need to be more of that. Coming back to your question, and I was thinking about this. I read an article. I'm sure many of you have seen it in. I think it was New York Times this weekend, about how the world was becoming more African. Quite a good one, I think. If someone has a link and put it in the chat. And it got me thinking, really, because I've always said, for me, tech or technology, the business we're doing, is to advance the continent toward prosperity. we're not doing it for tech. The only real goal is more prosperity on the continent. And it never really occurred to me whether more prosperity means more jobs or not. But in the article, they did mention that, the more tech, actually the less job we are seeing. And it is quite true. With a company like MFS Africa, for all that we do, we have about 700 people. 350 of those are in Nigeria, where we operate a network of about 400,000 POS. And we have 300 people who are covering 40 plus markets. And, and I don't think we will double that, So in essence, we are not creating jobs, and many companies like that. And one of the things, to go back to your question, what's in my mind is like, should job creation be one of our objectives as tech companies? And if it is, well, what kind of company should we be building? Because a lot of these companies that we are building are companies that are using digitalization. And as we mentioned, digitalization means optimization. And if you throw AI in there, the first application of AI for us as MFS Africa is to optimize our customer support, that a robot can read the request that is coming in and answer. So the number of tickets that someone can handle can go dramatically up, so we don't hire more. So there is, I think, a contradiction in there that is worth some reflection and some discussion around what kind of companies we want to build. And if prosperity means more jobs. So that's one thing I'm not clear about, but it could be a good subject for discussion. And certainly could inform policies and how money is invested in the coming years. The other thing that is top of mind, and Solomon touched on it also, is the I think it was Alex, the fragmentation of the regulation. And I spoke about this before earlier this year at the conference, in Kigali with President Kagame and the President of Zambia. We're pointing out that we have to submit 2 applications almost identical to get licensed in those 2 markets. Why can't we passport licenses? We have at least a precedent around that in European Union, where you can literally passport. So is the process the same service, the same application that are doing Rwanda? Why do I need to repeat it exactly for Tanzania, for Uganda, for Zambia, and so on and so forth? And I think it goes back sometimes to trust again, to which extent the authorities in Zambia trust the authorities in Rwanda that they have done a thorough job, and to which extent the authorities, in Zambia or Zimbabwe will trust you. So I do think there are some quick wins, and we all recognize that there are problems in the system, but there are some quick wins that I think we have more power than we realize to have to fix. We can decide to passport some licenses. We can decide that if I have a license in Kenya for financial services, well, some checks and balances have been observed already by the regulator in Kenya, that we don't need to waste another 2 years to apply for the same license in Uganda, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. That, I think, it's one of the things. And the last thing that gets me worried is some sort of fashionism, I want to call it. I don't know if that's a good English word, that makes us move too quickly as a continent. I feel like we are always chasing the new thing. It was carbon, now it's carbon. We're all talking about carbon. Before that, it was financial inclusion a few years ago. Now it's AI. And so what is our North Star? Can we just stay? And I think, economists, at least the one who does PhDs, stay a long time for a problem. I think it's important that as a continent, we stay long on what we believe is important to us, and we don't move too much. Because what happened is, across the board, we don't go deep enough to actually crack the problems. And, taking for someone who has tried to build a business for 13 years now, it takes time to bake. It takes time to actually get really what works and what works at scale. And I think we don't spend enough time thinking about our own problem and find solution. And we move too much with the fashion of the moment. And I think economists can help us, keep us honest on that.
Yeah, well, listen, Dare, I mean, honestly, it's not an African issue. I think globally, everybody chases the latest fashion. I mean, AI is the big thing right now, probably because of ChatGPT and other new technologies. But agreed, I mean, sort of figuring out what really works. I would just say in terms of job creation and whether, technology is job destroying or job creating, And again, you know, some of the economists might want to sink their teeth into it. I think historically we've seen that they're job creating, right? I mean, they're job destroying in the short term, but then job creating in the longer term, because you start doing, you know, higher value added things. You know, back 150 years or 100 years ago, saying what's going to happen to all of the footmen and, you know, stagecoach drivers now that the automobile has come along. And so, you know, see what the world looks like now. So anyway, we're always sort of brilliant in retrospect, but it's quite interesting to see how that has evolved over time. The regulation issue is totally, you know, it's a very important issue, and it's not only in digital, it's everywhere. And let's hope that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement folks can maybe figure out a way to make the continent much more of one single market. So I think that would be important. And Alex, I mean, I think that's a good segue to you. Obviously, international cooperation, it can either be at the regional level or the international level, like you're working on, you know, is quite important. And you talked about this a little bit before, you know, in terms of the SDGs, to make sure that these things are disseminated to emerging economies. What are some of the most important areas of focus to make sure that this happens at speed and at scale?
Right. So I switched my background. I kind of, first time I'm doing that on a call, I thought that's kind of cool. You can switch backgrounds, because I'm going to talk about GIGA in a second, but I first want to go back to regulation. I've only been at the ITU for just over 4 years, but I think one of our most best products is something that we call, which is our G5 accelerator. I'm going to put the link in the chat. This is where we assess the fitness or the fit for purpose of every regulatory agency in the world. And our member states actually allow us to go and score them. So we basically have done for years, I mean, actually the foundational rationale for ITU is working as in support of and in partnership with the regulatory agencies of countries around the world. That's our core constituent, the head of the regulatory agency. And one of our main programs and one of our main outcomes is where we've taken a set of principles that our member states support, things like having agile regulatory systems that are collaboration-based, that have the right institutional design, which means an independent regulatory authority, not part of the political mechanism, that they use evidence-based support, that there's sustainability integrated. And we put this all into a scoring framework. Again, our audience here would appreciate this as development economists. And we rank how robust the regulatory authority is. And so I put it into the link to the page that gives you all sorts of backgrounds on best practices. Jennifer, we know Jennifer in her past life oversaw the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index. And of course, indexes are great for business people or for policymakers to go and use that as a discussion with the policymaker or with the president or the prime minister and say, hey, here's some of the challenges as per what the ITU says on your policy regulatory framework. So let's take some action so I don't have to submit the same license that I did for 2 or 3 or 10 countries. Dari, that's for you. Okay, so that, please, I mean, that's, I think, a great tool and an asset that I just put into the chat. I might switch a bit now, part 2, to the GIGA project, because I mean, we have Solomon on the call, we have Dara. This is a partnership project between ITU and UNICEF to connect every school to the internet. This is really a universal connectivity project, because if we can connect every school, because if the school is the node of where you aim to connect, and you have connectivity to that school with sufficient bandwidth, then you basically crack the universal connectivity, with the school serving as the hub for the community. We're trying to, in this project, map every school where they're located, real time, green, yellow, red. Are they connected? Are they not connected? Are they partially connected? We're now mapping on top of that all of the infrastructure, the towers, the fiber. So we have all that information. We want to make that all available to anyone to use. So you're uncovering data uncertainty for the investor. And then we want to look at innovative financing mechanisms like blended finance. And then, you know, including how can you introduce microfinance, maybe even user-based, consumer retail-based financing. So we're looking at all those things. We have many of our partner countries are in Africa. So Solomon, we are long overdue to have a conversation. And Dara, I know that you'll be at MWC in February, so we're going to have a chance to catch up on that. But I just wanted to sort of share with the broader group that, you know, finding bankable projects, because that's really what this is all about. It's trying to uncover enough uncertainty and remove enough risks that you eventually tip a national or transnational connectivity project into bankability. That's probably what we're trying to do at GIGA. So, and that of course also includes the policy regulatory frameworks that need to be in place in that country that again remove uncertainty for the investors. So that's part of the GEIF project. Looking forward to sharing that as we go forward as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Alex, and it's very exciting to see the ITU and UNICEF and others working on this, because truly there's still such a huge digital divide, and we will always be fighting inequality, especially with the acceleration of technology, if this is not remedied quickly. So I do hope you guys talk amongst yourselves and find a way to collaborate among wonderful organizations to make magic happen together. So Anya, we don't have much time left, but I just wanted to come back to you very briefly. If you could just tell everybody what to worry about, because it's something people don't really think about. Everybody's worried about AI as sort of, the Terminator coming or whatever, but can you just, like, in a minute, remind everybody of why we care about this from an inequality perspective? How the rules of the game are being set, because I don't think many people really think about this very much. Anya?
No, it goes back to what I said about power narratives and the narratives are chosen and the hubris. So being able to, I always say that the best skill you can possibly invest in right now is not to become a coder or, do that as well if that pleases you, but is to ask really good questions. We have to come back to the basics. How does this impacting me? How does it impact the system? And sometimes we fail because we get so swayed by all of these very sensationalist narratives that we forget to ask very basic questions. These are potentially, and we've seen already, very, very transformative technologies. It changes everything from the root of what it means to be human to, how our society works. And I just wanted to, I know we have very short time, but Solomon and Daria both said something, super important. Solomon was speaking about we have to be ready to accept more failure, but we also need to be willing to have discussions about what stage of development do we allow for that failure to happen. Because that's very important to understand when we're talking about responsible AI in particular, but any kind of responsible frontier technologies being embedded into society. And I'm not a native speaker, but so I create words sometimes, because I feel like the English language doesn't afford me what I want to say. It's a very non-native speaker thing to do. And so sometimes I use the word unembed, because what is important to understand with these systems that we're becoming increasingly reliant upon, once it is embedded, it is very difficult to unembed. So if you accept failure at the conception phase, that's very different from when you're starting to choose use cases to when you're actually deciding to decommission a system that may or may not, already have, collected a lot of data and being part of a system and you're becoming reliant on that system. So that's one thing. And then Daria said something important, which is also an important part of answer to your question, Jennifer. Capital needs context, Daria said. Now, ethics need context. Regulations need context. And, there's definitely danger in the forum shopping tendency right now that, people going for areas where regulations are a bit more lax or where things, different developments. So that's like one big danger. But also to understand that every data fragment that goes into the systems tells a tale. It's shaped by societal biases, experiences, traumas, political stances, wars, not least. Every single war that ever happened, to humans, all of that is embedded into the system. So commanding this data isn't just about amassing knowledge, it's about steering those societal stories, swaying beliefs, shaping viewpoints. The cognitive effect of these technologies, how it will shape how we think. We have many countries, I think it's like 95 countries, is this coming year have elections coming up. This is where we're going to be seeing the impact. How does it sway and operate at the cognitive level? And then just one little kind of marketing thing, and I said I was speaking in my personal capacity, but this goes to Alex's point about, making stuff bankable. So IEEE, which is the biggest engineering technological organization in the world, actually a couple of years ago, launched for the first time from a standards organization, because most of you work with standards know that you often have to pay for standards. Now, to make sure that the organization, which is, a very large, kind of enterprise with volunteers and experts, and they released what's called P7000. So these are standards that covers every single aspect. And this is both to Solomon and Daria about how to make that innovation sort of responsible by design, ethical by design. And it's made available to everyone to access, because that was the organization means of saying, when it comes down to doing stuff ourselves, which is then a fundament for equality, a fundament for having that equal access to also do things in the right way, knowing what stage of the process where you can allow for failure and where you should absolutely not accept failure, you know, where you need local context and where you need to sort of put in the effort of making it bankable, you know, to use Alex's word. So on the dystopian narratives, I mean, I said WALL-E is a great kind of, what WALL-E does is that it actually questions, what does these technologies do with us as humans? Where do we ask questions? What type of questions? Any form of kind of painting this as, you know, kind of the more Terminator-like thing, always remember, the more sensationalist, the more PR effort there's been to try to deflect away from the real issues at stake. The real issues are here right now. And people speaking about, yeah, but we should be worrying about the stuff that's going to happen. We shouldn't try to say we should not worry about the stuff that can happen, but we should say that whatever happens is a result of every single decision you, I, everyone on this call, everyone listening in, every single one of our elected leaders make right now. And that's what I tell everyone. It's right here now with humans. Technology is just, it's just an extension of all of that. It's an extension of our hubris, and that worries me. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Anya. Wow, this has been an incredible call. And Paul, I think that I have been a very bad moderator by allowing us to go over time. So I'm not sure that we have any time to take any questions from the group, but I think that this has been an incredible example of why we need to break down the silos between the different areas, you know, whether it's, you know, econ, business, governance, and also sort of security issues. Only by bringing all of these things together can we start to solve some of the challenges. I'm hoping that people who have called in and who are listening in have learned something today. I certainly have. And it's been exciting to sort of see all of the discussions. And what I also hope is that we will have planted a few seeds, both in terms of collaboration, but in terms of new research that will help us to bring these things together. Paul, let me turn it back over to you. Let us know, I don't know, I think we don't have time for any Q&A, but I think that if people have any questions, they can certainly contact the organizers.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and a big thank you to our panelists for those insightful sessions. We only have one question there.
Okay.
But like you said, maybe the timing. So,
okay.
Should I still take the question?
Do we have time for that question? Paul?
Yes, sure. I mean, there's one question that I believe.
So what is the question? Can you read it out to us, because I'm on my iPad, so it's a bit of a challenge for me to read it.
Regarding this, may I know the efforts made by the African countries to combat the issue of energy poverty? So this is going with SDG and energy poverty in Africa. Yeah. Okay. So can I just suggest that is a super important question, but it's a little bit tangential to what we're discussing here. Unless Solomon, I know it's not in your area of purview, but do you want to just say something about what the bank is doing in that area in terms of, you know, energy poverty?
No, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we're trying to address is, you know, the lack of access, you know, to energy. You know, in addition, simultaneously addressing, you know, the need for more renewables. So this is one of the reasons that, you know, we're not only looking at grid power solutions, we're also looking at what we call distributed energy solutions. So this would be mini grids, off grids, you know, solar to the home as well, you know, and trying to bring it down to the price points where, you know, those who are in rural areas, you know, those who can least afford it, those who don't have, you know, energy access, you know, do have viable solutions for that. But, you know, please, you know, feel free to go to the AFDB website. You will see more of that. But I think the main message I want to give you is, as we look at climate change, as we look towards renewables, in the context of Africa, we're also focused really on energy access, because so many Africans do not have access to energy. And let's be honest, You need access to energy to, have, Alex achieve the full deployment of, of infrastructure connectivity. So the point around energy is a good point. I hope that was helpful, Jennifer.
That was great. Thanks a lot. And I think it's true. If we don't have energy, all the rest of it is sort of moot. Kids can't even learn if they don't have light. So with that, let me just then thank all the panelists. This has been a wonderful panel. As I said, I have learned a lot, and I hope that it has been interesting for those who have participated. And with that, Paul, let me pass back to you for the continuation of what I'm sure will be a very exciting day.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And thank you again to our panelists for making the time to join us and for sharing those insights with us. And to our participants for joining from wherever you join us from, thank you to you. This was the first session for GEIF 2023. We have our next session coming up at 13:30. It's like 1:30 p.m. CET. So if you are in the GMT zone, it's at 12:30 p.m. GMT, where we have a session on leaving no behind, rethinking globalization as in a fragmented world. So we hope that all of you can join us again. Participants that join us for this session can join us again for that session at 13:30 CET. So thank you all, and we'll come here again at 13:30. Yeah, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.